The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Harborough. I hope you've all had a nice autumn break. I'm with you now until Christmas, and you may notice I have a slightly new look. The wife has treated me to some new clothes. I've got a brand new hoodie which has got plenty of pockets in. It's a good thing. So where are we today then? Well, all week we're back in Harborough again. This is Dunton Bassett. Dunton Bassett, hill farm belonging to Rodolphus Bassett. This week on TVI we're back in Harborough as we take on a run of parishes that are close to the Leicestershire-Warwickshire border, not far away from Lutterworth. They're also close to two major roads, namely the A5 and the M1, the route of two railway lines, and a river which gives its name to the city of Leicester. It all sounds like it's a chunk of land that might have a few tales to tell, and it does. Today we're in Dunton Bassett, arguably the largest of the bunch and probably the one with the most history to it. It stands on a southern-facing slope and was anciently known as Donnytone. Its position is very prominent, leading many a historian to suggest that a settlement existed here even before Saxon times. The first part of the village's name means farm or settlement on a hill, whilst the Bassett part can be explained by the family that once owned it. By marriage, Dunton came into the possession of the Earl of Chester in the 12th century. His daughter Geva, or alternatively Lady Geva, was married to Richard Bassett. The Bassett family owned a considerable amount of land throughout the country. Like many other villages, therefore, Dunton Bassett was named after them. Lady Geva is probably the most important figure ever in Dunton Bassett's past. It's thanks to her that this place has its church, because it was Geva's stonemasons that built it. The village expanded from then onwards, with milling and framework knitting becoming important local industries. It would all change again with the introduction of the cricket club and the railway in the 1890s. Let's have a look at it all. So here we have Dunton Bassett as it was in 1900. The general shape and layout of the place hasn't much changed since these days, but there are a few differences. For one, the northern end of the village has now become a lot more built up. These empty country lanes now have houses on them. The north also has two sports facilities these days as well. The south has always been the nucleus of life in Dunton, and so it remains now. It's where all the main features like the church, the school and the village hall all are. You'll note there's a railway line running down the eastern side of the village. That's sort of, but not quite, the boundary between Dunton and Ashby Magna. There was once a station on that line named for Ashby Magna, even though it was closer to Dunton. Whilst the site of it might be in Ashby's boundaries, Dunton has some railway-related features. There can be no better place to start here than in the south amongst all the main bits. A lot of this is still the same now as it was here. Starting on Main Street, we'll work through this in a neat loop. We'll take in a pub, which isn't marked, the village hall, which is here, the school, which is almost next door, and the church in this southeastern corner. Let's get started with that pub then, shall we? This is the Dunton Bassett Arms, or if you prefer the less wordy acronymic title, the DBA. The DBA does not appear on that map because in 1900 it didn't exist, or at least not in the form we know and love today. In 1720 there was an alehouse on this site and it served the community with ale, music and support, much like a pub does these days I guess. It was then a single-storey thatched building. In 1912 it was rebuilt as the pub we know now. Over the years it's been adapted and improved, now offering accommodation as well as being a fine restaurant and a pub at the same time. It's still supporting the local community and still providing ales and music too. What more could you ask for in a village local? The DBA is a free house, meaning it's not tied to anybody. It's owned by a guy called Robert, who feels less like a landlord and more like a custodian of the last 300 years worth of them. Well, it might be a certain autumnal feeling today, but I never expected the kids to be back. It's still August. For some strange reason, the kids have started school in August, which is a very rare thing here in the UK. Usually it's the first week of September. That's going to make filming the school in a minute very awkward. Let's see if we can time this right. We've got the village hall to cover before we get to the school. That's this building right here on this corner. Let's have a look at the village hall next. In 1895, this was presented to the vicar of Dunton at the time by a man named Orson Wright as a memorial to his parents. Orson Wright was born in Dunton Bassett in 1853. When he was just 8 years old, he spent his days scaring crows and leading plough horses in the local fields. He later entered into an apprenticeship with a Leicester carpenter and joiner before in 1874 marrying Ada Harris, the daughter of a wheelwright. Wright would go on to become quite wealthy, purchasing the South Wigston estate in 1883. He can be thought of as the man who made South Wigston what it is today. Indeed, 6 of its streets, Orange, Water, Railway, Earlham, Garden, Healey and Timber, spell out his name. 2 others are named Dunton and Bassett because he never forgot his home village. Ever since this was built, the hall has always been the hub of social life here. Beforehand, that honour rested with the Methodist Chapel, built in 1837. In 1950, the first meeting of the Dunton Bassett Women's Institute was held in this village hall. It's still going strong, taking great interest in matters of public concern and village affairs. Next we have the school, Dunton Bassett Primary. There's been a school here since 1849, that's known for sure, but there appears to be no evidence of anything earlier. The current school was founded by Thomas Stokes, a former lord of the manor. He gave land for it, he built it, and then endowed it. He was an all-rounder, you could say. The endowment, known as Stokes' Charity, still exists today, as does the school, which has since been modernised a bit. It's certainly grown since the mid-1800s. Now from here, we need to get ourselves to the War Memorial and the church. To do that, we'll use a footpath that connects the Mount to Church Lane. Well, as it turned out, the school wasn't too bad. I timed it just about right to avoid most of the kids going in. I still can't get over that. Why are they back in August? It's not September yet. It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, so we've now made our way to the War Memorial, which is in this little enclosure here, and then we'll have a look at the church behind it. Here's the War Memorial then. This features the names of all 76 men from Dunton who served in World War I. Of them, 62 returned, the other 14 did not. Those who made it back are written on the memorial using black ink, and the names in red are the ones who weren't so fortunate. Interestingly, this one also shows a lot of other information, including the men's ship, unit, rank, forename initials, surname and service. It's very detailed. So next we come to the Church of All Saints, and this one's got a lot more history to it than you might think. As we already know, Dunton Bassett was a Saxon settlement, and so there's been a church here for a long time. It's believed the Saxons built one on this very site. By 1181, the manor of Dunton Bassett belonged to Hugh, the Earl of Chester. When he died, it passed to his daughter, Geva, who married Richard Bassett. It was Geva, who's sometimes also known by the more formal Lady Geva, who supposedly built this, the current church, at some point in the early 13th century. Indeed, inside here there's a stone portrait of her that sits over the doorway to the south vestry. There are also 2 portraits in the nave arcade, which are believed to be Geva's stonemasons. Until the 1520s, all of Dunton Bassett's vicars were chosen by the Benedictine Priory at Canwell in Sutton Coldfield. That priory was also founded by Lady Geva. The oldest parts of the church date from Geva's time. These are the north aisle, the nave, 2 of the south windows, and the east window of the chancel. In the 14th century, the clerestory was added, as well as the roof, the tower, and the spire. Some of the pews also date from this period and are still in the north aisle. In the 15th century, further work was undertaken with the tower arch and the windows. The chancel may well have been added at that time too, but it was rebuilt in the 19th century. During that rebuild, a stone coffin lid was found. Today it's built into the wall of the tower on your left-hand side as you enter. This church is connected to the Jacobite Rising in 1745. It's known that the Duke of Cumberland marched through Dunton Bassett on his way to Culloden Moor to defeat Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was retreating from Derby. Theories suggest that the church's stonework was used to sharpen their swords en route, and if you look closely, there are some scoring marks on the exterior walls here. There is another theory, though, that says the grooves were instead from Roundhead troops sharpening their weapons for the Battle of Naseby in 1645, but nobody's ever proved either story.
It always makes me wonder when we talk about someone like Jeeva, what they would make of today's modern world, because Dunton Bassett has changed greatly since her time, I can promise you that. It's a bit different to how life would have been, I'm sure. Right, let's follow this path. It goes through the churchyard and heads into some fields next. Over there.
Now we're going cross-country a little. Just north of the church on this map you can see there's a moated site and a series of open fields. They're not just fields now. On one of them is the village's playground these days, whilst another, close to the A426, has Dunton Bassett Cricket Club. Handily, there are footpaths to get to these. Dunton can claim to have had some very outstanding personalities over the past centuries. William Hewitt was one. He was a freeholder in the village in 1630. The Hewitt family supposedly lived in an elegant mansion which occupied the site of Hall Close. You won't find a street with that name here because this is Hall Close. Now just a set of earthworks, this is what you could see on the map, labelled as the site of a hall. The moat, marked on the same map, was related to the building. Located 100 metres north of the church, the site includes a small fish pond. Sub-rectangular and orientated east to west, the moat measures 60 metres by 50. It has two well-defined moat arms on the north and east sides, 6 metres wide and 1.5 metres deep, with an internal bank. The western arm appears to have been infilled. As for the fish pond, that measures 15 metres square and it's embanked on the east. It's situated on the eastern side of the moated area and is connected to it by a channel. Built today on one of the fields close to the moated site is a small playground. Although more typically accessed from the main street and not the church, going this way is handier for us. Next, let's talk a little bit about the cricket club, and to do that we have to go back to 1896. That's the year that Major Henry Robertson Aikman came to reside in Dunton Bassett. Hailing from Lanarkshire, the Major was married to the daughter of Thomas Stokes, the once Lord of the Manor of course. Although rich and well-to-do, he was a highly respected gentleman in Dunton. He owned around 1,000 acres of it. The Major was very interested in sports, the main ones being hunting and cricket. Hunting-wise, he had ample Leicestershire countryside to enjoy. For cricket though, you only need one field. Such was his wealth and power, he built his own private cricket ground close to All Saints Church. When his cricketing days were over, he presented that ground to the village. Today, we know it as Dunton Bassett Cricket Club, and this is easily, so the cricketing experts out there say, one of the finest grounds and wickets in Leicestershire. The club has had at least one well-known player, Nick Cook, who went on to play for Leicestershire and England.
Was fun. I just had to squeeze my way past a herd of cows who are blocking the entrance onto this road. Now this road's very familiar to us. This is the A426. We've seen this a few times before. We're not going to be on here for very long because all we're really doing at this point is taking a left turn and then turning right immediately, because we're going to follow another footpath now which will take us up towards the station.
Using another footpath, we're about to head into this area, briefly into Ashby Magna and back out again. Note the railway line here. The vast majority of that is not in Dunton Bassett. However, that doesn't mean Dunton doesn't have some railway-related features. This one is obvious, the old railway hotel. However, it also has another that's not quite so visible. The footpath will bring us out close to the route of the Great Central Railway, the last main line to be built from the north of England to London. It was opened in 1899 and it ran just to the east of Dunton Bassett, separating it from the village of Ashby Magna. A station was provided bearing Ashby's name, even though Dunton was bigger. The line closed in 1969 and now all that's left is its desolate, overgrown old route. The M1 also runs parallel to it on its eastern side these days. A word, by the way, for the Dunton-Ashby boundary while we're here. It's unusually straight, consisting of a high bank and a deep, wide, dry ditch. It's anticipated that it could be 1,000 years old and one of the finest examples of a Saxon boundary ever to be seen in this country. Ashby Magna Station closed along with the line, and today very little remains of it. Some of it had to be demolished as a result of the M1's construction. Most notably, the station master's house and the goods yard disappeared as a result of that. Today, a timber merchant occupies the rest of the site, and the remains of a cattle dock are still visible. Architecturally, the station was very similar to the one at Whetstone just to the north. It had a single island platform designed by Alexander Ross. This allowed the tracks to pass either side and was intended to facilitate some future expansion to the railway. Access to the station was provided by a stairway from a road bridge. So why are we talking about the station here if all of this is within Ashby Magna? Shouldn't this be in a different video? Well, yeah, maybe, but it was much closer to Dunton. There's another reason why too. South of the station, there's something else on the old line which does fall within Dunton Bassett, a 96-yard long tunnel. Dunton Bassett Tunnel was the shortest of all on the Great Central Railway, so much so that you could describe it as an overgrown bridge instead. Its job was simple. It was designed to carry the railway under a minor road linking Dunton to Gilmorton. It still does, because even though there's no line anymore, the tunnel remains intact. It was built in around 1897, some 2 years or so before the railway line officially opened. It was the work of the contractors Topham, Jones and Railton. They were responsible for building this section of the entire line which ran between Ayleston and Rugby. This section was quite important. It was the last part of the entire line to be built. That meant this tunnel was a key component in the operation of the whole thing. Basically, without this tunnel, it may never have opened at all. So hey, no pressure lads. The tunnel is now blocked up at the southern end these days with a wire fence and a 4-foot-high mound of earth. The northern end remains open, but don't try to access it, it's privately owned. Today, the tunnel belongs to the same timber company that own the station site. It has previously been used by them for the storage of its wood. It's empty these days though. To the south of the tunnel, the route of the line runs through a deep cutting for several hundred yards before giving way to a slight embankment. At the end of that cutting, on the eastern side, are the remains of a sizable precast concrete lineman's hut. On Station Road now, back over the border into Dunton Bassett, we find ourselves outside this old pub, which began its life as the Railway Hotel. According to some sources, it opened in 1905, but we know that can't be the case. It was named on the 1900 OS map, so the likelihood is that this is actually late 1890s. Many a Dunton resident will know this building by a different name, the Merry Monk, as that's what it would become during the 20th century. It was more recently used as an Indian restaurant called Spice 45. As you can see though now, the place is disused and looking rather forlorn. Now a bit further up the street, next we come to the second of those sporting facilities that have sprung up since the days when all this was fields. Welcome to the home ground of Dunton and Broughton United Football Club, simply known as Station Road. The ground is located down the end of a narrow driveway almost opposite the former Merry Monk. Well maintained, it has a rural feel about it with views of rolling hills in every direction. Its clubhouse has a TV, a pool table, a lounge bar and snug armchairs that would not look out of place in a stately home. Dunton and Broughton were formed in 2002 after two former clubs in the area merged. They were Dunton Bassett FC and Broughton Rangers Juniors. The club received FA Charter status in 2005. This is a community club and it caters for everyone, regardless of your age or gender. They have junior sides for both boys and girls from the age of 2 upwards. Talk about starting them young, eh? The seniors include a walking football team and an over 75 side. In short, Dunton and Broughton is a great example of how a local football club should be run.
Okay, now it's a case of getting ourselves back into the main village centre, and to do that we're using basically 2 roads. We're using Station Road to start with, then we'll turn onto Main Street, and that will take us back down to the Dunton Bassett Arms where this all began. I've been going for about 45 minutes. Very pleasant walk on some public rights of way. I've enjoyed this one.
Back in 1900, Station Road was nowhere near as built up as it is now, as you can see here. It's one of the roads that's grown as the village has over time. Using it, we can return to the start. That means coming back into the village from the north along this road. Marked here is the Methodist Chapel, but that's long gone. Let's see what's there now. Seeing as this part is mostly residential for a bit, let's chuck in a mention of another famous family who once lived here, the Twigdons. During the late 19th century, the Twigdon family lived in what would become the village post office, now long gone by the way. They were regarded as a fairground family and had the distinction of operating the first roundabouts in Britain. They also took the first mechanical ride to operate at Nottingham's Goose Fair. They were also the first to take a cinematograph film of workers leaving the Atkins factory in Hinckley, which was later shown at a fairground off Coventry Road. The successors of the Twigdon family now operate one of the most unique setups for timber haulage in the country. Industrially, Dunton Bassett was all about farming until the 17th century. That's when framework knitting came along. First introduced to several Leicestershire villages in the early 17th century, it was a cottage industry and workers' frames were usually hired from Leicester. Framework knitting carried on in Dunton for over 200 years. The frames were set up in outhouses usually, but some were located within the cottages themselves. It must have contributed in some small way to the growth of the village. In 1563, Dunton only had 24 households, a fairly average number for that time. However, by 1801, the population had risen to 407. Of that number, 78 were employed in agriculture and 130 were in trade and manufacture. This shows a shift from farming to other industries. So here we have the site of the Methodist Chapel as we saw on the map. As you can see, it's no longer here. It was a primitive Methodist chapel and it was in existence by 1840. Some sources state 1837, but nobody's totally sure of when exactly it was built. Whatever the case, it was rebuilt anyway in 1881, and that fact is confirmed by way of a plaque on a nearby wall. The ground plan on the OS map suggests it had a perched gable facing the street, typical of the style of chapels seen across the East Midlands in the 1880s. It had seating for 120, and there was a schoolroom too. It was closed and then demolished, but the plaque doesn't state which one of those events occurred in 1972, the end date upon it. Its site was then used for access to the new cul-de-sac Ralph's Close. Don't be fooled by Chapel Close further up the road. Perhaps that one refers to the original building.
Now, as is traditional, before we leave Dunton Bassett behind, I have to leave one of these cards to mark that I've been to the place, and here we have a parish notice board where I can do that. It's a pin board as well, which is always very helpful. There we go, Dunton Bassett is on the board. You can find this parish notice board right next to this house here. Now this is called the Crooked Billet because I believe that's another old pub. A name like Crooked Billet would certainly suggest that that was a boozer at one time. From here, it's a very simple case of getting back to the Dunton Bassett Arms. All you have to do is go this way and take a right turn at that corner and you're literally outside the pub. What a beautiful village.
A lot of the villages in this area used to have watermills within their boundaries. Dunton is no exception to that rule, although its mill is no longer working. Our final job here is to check out what's become of it today. The site of Dunton Mill is about half a mile to the south of the village, really close to the southern parish boundary. Milling was certainly a thing in Leicestershire. Most of the time mills were water powered out here. That said, Dunton is believed to have once had a windmill too. That's never been proven, but there was definitely a watermill on the outskirts of the village. It was quite small and dates back to the 13th century. Not much is known about it, but the height of the bank above which the old mill pond was situated suggests that its wheel could have been of the overshot type. It was fairly prosperous. In 1918, when the mill and the 42 acres surrounding it were sold by Charles Berridge, it fetched £1,125, a tiny little sum in those days. The mill had 2 pairs of grinding stones, and records state that a good grinding business had been carried on for many years at it. It's now been converted into a private dwelling. Millers, along with bakers, blacksmiths and wheelwrights, were the most important craftsmen in villages like Dunton Bassett, and we should all be thankful for their once existence. With Dunton Mill visited, that brings us to the end of Dunton Bassett. Mark off another one in Harborough, everyone. That's 19 of them complete. Tomorrow we're going to the 20th. Now, if you live in Leicester, your city owes its very title to the small stream this next one is named after. See you there. Hello folks, welcome back to Harborough once again. Now, today we find ourselves in a village that's very difficult for some non-locals to pronounce. Even I thought this was something different to what it actually is. I thought this initially was lair, like Dragon's Lair or Witch's Lair. Instead, it's lair. Lair, shallow, slow-moving river. Now this is an interesting little place. Welcome to the village which you could argue gives its name to the entire county of Leicestershire. Well, indirectly anyway. Let's explain. This is Lair, which itself is named after a watercourse originally known as the Legor, or more commonly the Legra. Nobody is totally sure of what that means, myself included, but from what I can gather, it seems to mean shallow, slow-moving river. That's a little ironic considering that the Legra might be the old name for the River Soar, which is anything but slow or shallow, especially by the time it gets to Leicester itself. In any event, the source of the Legra can be found to the east of the village, and it runs into the Soar before it hits the city. So this little-known village, 10 miles southeast of Leicester, can be thought of as the very root of the entire county's name, via the city, the river, and the old name for that river. If you trace it back like that, it makes complete sense. So, if this is the county's true root, what do we find at it? Well, aside from the Legra, Lair has 2 public houses called the Queen's Arms and the Crab and Cow, as well as a church, a village hall, and a riding establishment. It also has an old school which today is used as the village hall. It hosts a preschool group and the Dunton Scout group, amongst other things. Lair was also on the route of a now disused railway line, much like neighbouring Dunton. The difference is that the line in question here is not the same one. It was the Leicester to Rugby branch line, and here we can set foot on part of that old railway. Let's do just that as we explore the route of Leicestershire. So this is Lair as it was in 1900, and generally it looks almost the same as this today, but don't be deceived. Some subtle changes have taken place. Whilst the general form of the village is still as depicted here, a lot within it has altered. The main area of settlement is the main street, which runs from north to south. The northern end can be defined by an old railway bridge, and the southern end likewise by a road between Frolesworth and Dunton Bassett. It's hard to define where the dead centre of Leia lies though. Some may argue it's the church in the south of the village, whilst others may say it's the crossroads near the village hall. Take your pick. The source of the Legra, which gives the village its name, is to the east of it. We can't get to the exact source, but we can talk about what stands on that river. Let's get started with the southern end of the village, which has the church and a pub called the Queen's Arms. They are both still there and doing exactly what they were designed to. This part of the village has grown considerably otherwise. There are several new streets and cul-de-sacs now in place of these leafy open areas. We start in one of those new cul-de-sacs, St Margaret's Close off the Frolesworth Road. In and of itself, this street is nothing special. My apologies to anyone who lives in it. However, the residents of this street are able to say that they live close to one of the village's historic landmarks, Leia's first permanent school. And this is that building. Education in Leia can be traced back to the mid-1600s, but it didn't have anything approaching a permanent school until 1814. That's when this was built. It was funded by subscriptions. Just under £180 in fact helped to build this little school. It remained Leia's only school until 1873. We'll see the results of what happened in that year later when we reach the village hall. Next up we have the Church of St Peter, which has a squat tower and a recessed spire, easily the most characterful parts of this building. Otherwise it has a north aisle, a nave, a chancel and a south porch. The oldest part of the church is the tower, built of ashlar in the 14th century. The rest was rebuilt between 1867 and 1868, replacing an earlier structure. The architect was William Smith of London. Smith was the same guy who rebuilt the church at Showell on the other side of Lutterworth. It was his idea to add the north aisle here. He rebuilt this church with granite and a type of rock we've never met before, syenite. Syenite is similar to granite, but it has less quartz within it. St Peter's four-bay arcade with its layered coloured stone is similar to the one at Gilmorton. The floor has encaustic tiles, whilst pews and choir stalls are all made of oak. There is just the one interesting monument in this church, and it's to Susanna Smith, dated 1792. Only the tower, font and that memorial predate the Victorian rebuild. Nicholas Pevsner didn't like this church. He mentions in his entry for St Peter's that it seemed gloomy, although that was probably only due to the lack of a clerestory.
Now, once you get beyond the church, you're then heading back towards Dunton Bassett and towards one of Leia's two mills. We'll talk a bit more about those later. You'll also find this path, which leads down to an extension of the churchyard, which we'll check out in a moment. There's no way through this. On the map, it does say there is, but for some strange reason, there isn't. I've just discovered that. And then what we'll do after we've had a look at that is we'll go back through this gate, take a right turn, go past the church, and head for a pub.
So next we have the first of a few pubs here in Leia. Some are still going, others not so. This one is the Queen's Arms. It's a former Marston's pub which was sold off as a free house a few years ago. Although the name is first recorded in 1840, the building is much older, as you can likely tell just by looking at it. Some sources date this as far back as the 1500s. The Queen's Arms was known to be linked to some manorial land, and so it may well have been built and owned by the Lord. A lively and popular village pub, it has a public bar to the front with a larger than usual snug annex. To the rear is the dining room and a lawned garden. The pub was often the setting for auctions and public meetings. In terms of ownership, the Ladkin family were licensees for over 60 years from the 1830s onwards. One former landlady, Jane Ladkin, was renowned for being a village personality and also a very big woman, literally. Occasionally her size led her to become trapped in railway carriage doors. In fact, her size was so great that upon her death her coffin was too large to go through the pub's door. To get her out, part of the pub's wall had to be dismantled. As well as being rather large, Jane was also known well for her fruit, grown within her very own orchard. Her plums were a special variety, which was sold at Leicester Market during the season. After her death, by sheer coincidence, the trees also died and her special variety was gone forever.
Well, I've seen some cracking buildings already this morning. There were some good ones in Dunton Bassett, and there's been a few in Lair as well. But I think this is currently winning at the moment. This is the old manor, which is next to the Queen's Arms. Would you just look at how gorgeous this is? And check out on the roof up there, you can see some foxes in the thatch. Well, we are in Leicestershire after all.
Now we're heading up into the north of the village, and arguably this is where all the good stuff is, and indeed was. Marked on this map are various things, beginning with this school. That's not a school anymore, as we'll see shortly. There's a chapel and 2 more pubs shown here as well, but none of them are the same as they were in these days. So the school is now the village hall. As a school, it was built to replace the one on Frolesworth Road in 1873. It was known as St Peter's School. Built in the Gothic arts and crafts style, it's a great example of this style, which was often used for small village schools in the Midlands. It was erected by the local village builder, whose name is unfortunately unknown. Its site, though, was donated by the lady of the manor. It stands where a manor house used to be beforehand. One head teacher, Gloucestershire-born Caroline Goddard, who later became Richardson after marriage, ran it for 45 years. Speaking of the number 45, that was the average attendance too. On Mrs. Richardson's retirement in 1920, a lack of suitable accommodation made it difficult to appoint her replacement. So therefore the school closed, forcing children to walk 2 miles up the road to Dunton Bassett instead. That only lasted for 3 years though, and Lair did reopen in 1923. Despite that, the same issue persisted throughout its second stint, the difficulty in appointing a head teacher with suitable village accommodation. It closed again in 1945, but it was only ever supposed to be temporarily. That closure became permanent in 1947, and the building became the village hall instead. Just behind the school we have the second pub. This is the one labelled on the old map as being the White Horse. Now it's called the Crab and Cow, and it's more of a restaurant than a pub. It opened with the new branding in 2015 after serving as the White Horse since it was built way back in the 18th century. Extensively refurbished by the trio of Paul, Nathan and Cheryl Burrell, walk inside this now and you'll find it decked out in steely greys and blues. The general manager, Nick Broderick, formerly ran a style bar in Leicester and Rick Stein's seafood restaurant at Padstow in his native Cornwall. No surprise then that the menu here often features plenty of fresh fish, delivered daily from Cornwall, as well as local Leicestershire meat and produce. It's all within familiar gastro-pub territory, but it has enough to interest even the most diverse of palates. Mauritian fish curry, Singapore chili crab, and dishes which have hints of North Africa and Korea are all culinary delights you can find within these old pub walls today.
You know what, this is the sort of village I love, and the reason for it is quite weird actually. It's the sort of village where you can stand in the middle of the road and not have any fear that anyone's going to come past and try and knock you over. Even that guy that just came past just now was quite happy just to sail straight through. It's just so quiet, and that's what makes this perfect, I think. I'm quite enjoying my time here so far. So we are in the middle of Main Street and we've seen a few of its properties already. Let's talk about a few more of them.
Now, there used to be a third pub in Leire. It was called the Bull's Head, and now it's one of the houses that line the rest of Main Street between here and the Methodist Chapel. The Bull's Head, of course, was still marked on the OS map because it was still in business at that point. It closed in 1926. So anyway, this is Main Street, and doesn't it look fabulous, or is that just me? A couple of these properties have a story or two they could tell. Take Ash House, for example. This used to be a butcher's shop until its closure in the 1920s. In the past, Leire had its own blacksmith shop and a wheelwright too, but neither of them exist today. Get this though, before Ash House was serving meat, it actually had a religious purpose. Originally, it was used as a synagogue because there was a strong Jewish faction in this village. Now we're at the chapel, which was built in 1863 by the Ludford family. It's believed an earlier Methodist chapel once stood here before this one. If it did, it was built in 1817. This tallies with trade directories which in 1846 suggest there was only one chapel in Leire, which was Wesleyan and was built about 30 years ago, so says the text. Not everybody seems to be sure as to which denomination of nonconformists used this building at first. It's possible that the congregation here were primitive Methodists to start with, even though the date stone on the wall clearly says Wesleyan. For sure, by 1863, it was abundantly clear that the congregation were Wesleyans. It closed for worship in 1977 and is now a private residence.
So many beautiful buildings, you just don't know where to look sometimes. Right, we've reached Stemborough Lane, and this is a dead end. It leads down to Leire's other mill. It's called Stemborough Mill, and it's close to that mill where the source of the Legra is. Again, we'll talk about this in a little while. Next job for us though is not to go down there. Instead, it's to go down here, back lane. We've walked almost all the way up Main Street, so now we have to make our way back to where we started. There are two ways to do that. The easiest way would be to just turn around and retrace our steps, but since when did I do things the easy way? Nope, for us it's back lane, which will take us to a section of the Leicestershire Round footpath which crosses through Leire at Oak Avenue. See you shortly.
Okay, we're back to St Margaret's Drive, but we're not quite done with Leire just yet. Of course, we still need to talk about those mills, but there's also something to the west of the village. Looking here from St Margaret's Drive, you can see the road heads off to the west towards Frolesworth. We're going down there in a few moments because we need to see something called the Jubilee Walk. Just before we leave Leia behind, there's another area we need to cover. On the road out of the village to the west is the playing field. It occupies this triangle of land here. Right next to it you can see the route of a railway line, and this is one we've never seen before. It's the now disused Leicester to Rugby branch line, and part of it is now open to the public. So this is the old railway line, and the locals know this beautiful spot as the Jubilee Walk. This railway cutting can be a real sun trap in the warmer months. It does get walked in the winter too by many, but you need your boots on because it becomes quite damp at that time of year. In 2010, some work was done to make pathways through the damper areas easier for walkers. It gained the Jubilee name in 2012 to celebrate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. So what about the line that used to come through here then? Well, the Leicester to Rugby branch was only a short railway, but it was pretty important. It was part of the Midland Counties Railway, which the long-term viewers will remember us discussing the formation of back in the Eastward episode of Broxtowe. The network was designed to connect Leicester, Derby, Nottingham and Rugby together, linking them to the other Midland lines around Birmingham and therefore to London. The section between Leicester and Rugby was a little difficult to build. Progress was hampered by wet weather and the need for several long cuttings and embankments. There were 2 tunnels at Knighton and Ulsthorpe, and a bridge was also required to cross the River Avon and the Oxford Canal at Rugby. Leia never had a full-blown station on this line, but it did have a short-lived halt. It opened in 1925 and closed with the line in 1962. Half a mile of the line's former route through the cutting was donated by a parishioner and now has an abundance of documented flora and fauna, much used by walkers from Leia and beyond. And so to the playing field, which you can find tucked away in that little triangular patch of land next to the cutting. This was another charitable donation to the village, and today it's the site of the children's recreation area. The play equipment was bought thanks to village fundraising and grants. The playing field is also the main venue for the annual Leia Village Fete. This is the high spot of Fete Week and is the main village fundraiser. Normally, there are games, stalls, teas and barbecues, bars, a music stage, a classic car show and a dog show too. Any money raised goes to the village and to the church. The annual Leia cricket match also takes place here, which sees the northern half of the village take on the southern half. I wonder, where do they draw the line? And here's one last section to finish off, concerning the 2 watermills that Leia has to its name. Both sit on the Legra, the rivulet that joins the Soar and gives its name to Leicester. One of them is called Stemborough Mill. Its first written record dates back to 1212, but a mill on its site was recorded in the Domesday Book. It was once owned by the Earl of Aylesford during the Cromwellian government. There was no mention of the mill between 1279 and 1661, but it remained with successive earls until 1913. In 1920, Stemborough Mill was purchased by George Pickering, who, with his son Len, worked it until 1944, when it was finally closed down after 730 years. In 1981, the Cherry family bought the mill and painstakingly restored the water wheel, some 16 feet in diameter, to its former glory. They used the mill water to build up a trout farm, which was designed to produce 12 tons of rainbow trout every year. The other mill was simply called Leia Mill, and it operated on the same stream. It was built in 1773. Its machinery is no longer there, unlike the one at Stemborough. Its wheel was 13 feet in diameter and was the breast shot type. Leia Mill has now been converted into a private residence. By the way, it's not known if Stemborough was ever a little hamlet in its own right, built up around the mill, but it's likely, I'd say. As well as the mill, some brickworks once existed in the area too. Incidentally, the Goldens, who lived at Norfolk House in Leia, had a large poultry enterprise in Stemborough Lane. Their unique variety of light Sussex was renowned throughout the country. So that's Leia, everybody, and what an interesting little village that was. Tomorrow we're going to another that has a bit of a storied past. Just up the road is a linear village that looks quite similar to Leia, but it's seen a raft of changes, rendering it almost unrecognisable since the turn of the 20th century. See you there.
Welcome back to Harborough again, everybody, and to the smallest village I'll be doing this week. It's so small, it's all on one street virtually. There's a few offshoots, but the main part of this village is on one road. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm making my way from one end of the village to the other so that I can just walk straight back down and show you everything that's within it. I'll tell you what, there's some brilliant views in this place. Here's what I can see at this point right here. Check this out. How about that for lovely Leicestershire countryside? Fabulous. We'll be seeing plenty of this as we explore the parish of Frolesworth. Frolesworth, Freophil's enclosure. Today on TVI we come to the village of Frolesworth, a small settlement located mainly on one road running between Leire and Sharnford. Roughly equidistant from both Hinckley and Lutterworth, Frolesworth's location is one of rural tranquility, situated as it is right in the middle of some lush farmland. The majority of the current buildings in Frolesworth are aligned with or set back from the single main street, although it does have a small number of outlying farms, homes and businesses. In total, there are somewhere between 80 and 120 dwellings here. Its boundary hasn't altered much in the past 200 years, with virtually all of the 20th century properties being infill sites instead of whacking great housing estates. The Leicestershire Round footpath passes through Frolesworth, so often it gets visited by walkers. Adding to that, several additional rights of way lead through some of the local fields, including one that runs to and around an artificial lake in the fields of Manor Farm. From pretty much anywhere out to the west of the place, you're guaranteed a great view of the rolling Leicestershire hills. There can be no denying who the most celebrated former resident of the village is, John Smith. He was a distinguished judge and later Lord Chief Baron of the Exchequer in Scotland. Born in this parish in 1657, some of Frolesworth's landmarks are related to him, most notably the almshouses near a crossroads. Originally just 4 of them, there are now 16, and they're all governed by Baron Smith's charity. Not far from them is Kingsmead Marquees, a company with their own little tale. Let's check it all out, folks. As usual, let's start by having a look at Frolesworth on the 1900 map. This is a simple little village in terms of its layout. It basically occupies just the one main street. That said, there are a couple of offshoots, most notably at the southeastern corner, where a road runs south to Ulsthorpe and another northwards to Broughton Astley. That's known around here as the Crossroads, albeit a staggered one because the streets don't quite match up. A lot of Frolesworth's best landmarks used to be around that junction. Further west, the road snakes its way up towards Sharnford via some open countryside, passing the church and the site of one of its former pubs on the way. There's also a big lake out there too, although it's not marked on this map. Let's zoom in and have a closer look at it. So essentially we're going to walk through Frolesworth from west to east, starting at Frolesworth Manor Lake, not marked on this map. Then we'll head to the Royal Oak pub. This western end of the village also features the Church of St Nicholas and the old post office, as well as the pub, which by the way is no longer trading. Let's walk it. Frolesworth Manor Lake doesn't appear on that map because it was artificially created a long time after that was produced. The lake is basically a fishery, but it also attracts wildlife. It's not uncommon to see birdwatchers around it, especially in the summertime. It's like a magnet for such people. The good thing about it is that Frolesworth Manor Lake is accessible to the general public, thanks to the network of public footpaths that cross some of this farmland. One of them was purpose-built to circumnavigate the lake, and that provides the locals with a brilliant little spot to walk their dogs, or just to get out and exercise themselves for a little while. Into the village itself now. Here we have the former Royal Oak pub, although some of the locals simply know it as the Oak. Now it's nothing more than just number 32 because it stopped pulling pints a long time ago and became a private residence. Mind you, the Oak can still lay claim to a bit of local notoriety. It's reputedly the oldest house in the village, dating back to 1550. Okay, next up it's the church, which is hiding away behind the phone box you can see over my right shoulder there. Just before we go to the church, I want to make a mention of something you saw in that last section, which I didn't know anything about until I actually arrived in Frolesworth this morning. As I was coming away from the lake and through that farmyard, you'll have noticed a big building. That is something called Woodfield School. It's a special educational needs school, which isn't marked on the map, strangely. Bit weird, isn't it? But there we go, that's what that was. So let's go for the church then, which is over there. Defining the centre of the village, or at least the centre of the main road through it, is the Church of St Nicholas. This sits on the highest ground anywhere in Frolesworth. The tower is a local landmark when approaching the village both during the day and at night, when latterly the church is lit with amber lights. This one consists of a tower, both north and south aisles, a chancel, a nave, a vestry and a porch. The earliest parts date to the 13th century. However, the tower was rebuilt in 1762 and a further Victorian restoration took place in 1887 and 88 by the architect W. Bassett-Smith. One part of this that's altered considerably since it was built is that porch. It was originally made entirely of wood with a thatched roof and is now partly brick with a lead roof instead. Inside this church you can find the Staresmore tombs. There are two, one either side of the altar. One belongs to Francis Staresmore, whilst the other belongs to his wife. Staresmore was an MP for Leicestershire, albeit only briefly. He was elected to the Commons in 1626, but he died later that year. His memorial in this church was erected by his widow in 1631 and shows him in armour with his feet against a shield of arms with effigies of his 8 children, 3 girls and 5 boys. His wife died in 1657 and now lies in her own tomb. Here's something rather interesting too. His wife was also a Francis. It was spelt with an E, the standard female version of the name. The other memorial of note in this church is the one to John Smith. We'll talk more about him though as we approach the eastern end of the village. Back out onto the road, next we pass the old post office. Frolesworth has long since lost its once vital amenities, such as this. It used to have a shop too at one time. Nowadays, the average Frolesworthian has to travel to get to their nearest shop or post office. Luckily, it's only a couple of miles away from Broughton Astley, which has both. There's a very eclectic mix in this village, housing styles wise, because you have houses like Rosedale House, this one here, 2.5 stories tall, and probably I would say 17th, potentially 18th century, could even be early 19th actually. And then you have houses like the bungalow, which is dead opposite. I'll just get across the road and I'll show you, which is definitely mid-20th, isn't it? So as you walk through this village, you're not subjected to the same thing the whole way down. There are some nice mixed properties in Frolesworth. Now there's one property, as far as I'm concerned, that stands out more than most as you drive or walk through this place, and you can find it on a bend just up here. It's called Frolesworth House. By some margin, the eastern end of Frolesworth around the crossroads has far more than the west. Most of the village's amenities and services used to be grouped around them. Now, a lot of them have gone, like this school for example. However, a few do still remain. You can see some almshouses on this junction. They are very much still in use. There are also some pretty big properties at this end of the village. This one is probably the one most regular drivers through the place will recognise most. This is Frolesworth House. Like a tall white beacon, this 8-foot behemoth of a house is early 19th century and is Grade 2 listed. It sticks out like a sore thumb against a backdrop of much lower surroundings. According to some, this is also known as Home Farm.
This 250-year-old building has been painstakingly restored in places to incorporate modern conveniences. It still retains a lot of its historic features though. These two houses stand on the site of the former Plough and Harrow pub. At first, the inn was simply known as the Plough before later changing its name. Close to its site there was a butcher's shop which had an abattoir at the rear. The pub was demolished in 2002, but its name lives on thanks to Harrow House, one of these two new builds. Around the back of these houses there once stood that small school which we've just seen on the map. Not a lot is known about it, but it became a public elementary. Built in 1870, it was originally a Church of England weekday school. It was enlarged in 1907 to accommodate up to 72 children. It was attended by children between the ages of 5 and 11. It was sold off in 1958 after it closed, and now there's no trace of it because its site has been built over. Yeah, definitely no trace of the old school now. I even had a little look up that little drive just to see if I could see any remains of it, but it's definitely gone. Anyway, standing here at this corner, the school is probably the last thing on your mind because you can see quite a few other things. Over there, you can see a block of buildings which are very important to Frolesworth. We'll discover what they are in a moment. But also on this corner, you can see this building. Now this has got a little story to tell all of its own. On the other side of the crossroads we have a business called Kingsmead Marquise. A small family business, this was founded in 1962 by John Breward and his father Horace. From humble beginnings, Kingsmead Marquise has now grown into a fourth-generation leader in the event industry. John Breward originally sold wholesale knitwear at markets and showgrounds across Shropshire, regularly hiring marquees from a local supplier to set up his stall. They were often poor quality and often mould-ridden marquees, and so his son Andrew decided to take matters into his own hands, literally. Andrew taught himself to sew, purchased a roll of canvas and a second-hand Singer sewing machine. The result was his very first marquee, stitched all by himself. This was in his bedroom at his parents' bungalow in Barwell, just up the road near Hinckley. The bungalow was called Kingsmead, and thus the name of the business was born. When Andrew used it at shows, other stall owners took notice. Impressed by its superior quality, they began asking for their own. That's where Frolesworth comes in. Kingsmead needed a premises to make the marquees in, and this building was available. It used to be Harrison's Seed Merchants. Now we come to the corner of the Ulsthorpe Road where there's a group of buildings laid out in a square. These are Baron Smith's almshouses. These cottage-style dwellings were built in 1725. Originally, there were just 4 of them, but in 1761, 5 more were added at right angles to the left and the right of the original row. More were added in 1796 and 1834. There are now 16 cottages in all, one of which is lived in by the warden. They were founded by John Smith, once the Lord Chief Baron of the Exchequer in Scotland. He was born in Frolesworth in 1657. The almshouses are governed by the trustees of Baron Smith's charity. John Smith was the son of Roger Smith of Frolesworth and matriculated at Lincoln College, Oxford on the 12th of September 1676 at the age of 19. He was primarily a barrister thereafter and was appointed a Justice of the Court of Common Pleas in Ireland on Christmas Eve in 1700. He was transferred to be a Baron of the Court of the Exchequer in England in 1702, before in May 1708 being selected to settle the Court of the Exchequer in Scotland after the union with England. For that purpose he was made Lord Chief Baron of the Exchequer in Scotland, although he kept his place in the English court, receiving an additional £500 a year on his salary. Although he performed none of the English duties, he enjoyed both his English and his Scottish offices until his death in 1726 at the age of 69. Smith was a benefactor of his native Frolesworth. By his will, he founded and endowed a hospital for 14 poor widows. In other words, the original row of almshouses.
All in all, John Smith seems to have been a very good man, doesn't he? He's got nothing to do with beer though, I'm afraid, people. If you're a John Smith's fan, Frolesworth is not the place to come, unfortunately. Okay, we have one landmark left here in this village, and it's to do with the almshouses, actually. On the corner of the almshouses, you can see the village hall. Forming part of the almshouse complex is Frolesworth Village Hall. The hall was formerly the reading room for the residents of the square, and to this day it's still leased from Smith's charity. It was constructed of brick with a slate roof in the 1920s and is pretty easy to find, being the last building on the Ulsthorpe Road. The hall is rectangular with a kitchen extension at the southwestern corner and a toilet block extension to the east. There's also a small car park. So that's Frolesworth, everybody, and that leaves us with two more to cover in Harborough this week. Tomorrow we'll be in the first of a pair of twins, which I'm going to walk together. Both are well known in these parts for their woodcutting industry. See you there, people. Welcome back to Harborough again, everybody. Now we're going to end this week with a pair of twins, which I'm going to walk continuously. I'm going to do them both together. One is a Magna, the other is a Parva, and those are Latin terms, which we're very familiar with by now, aren't we? Now this first one is Magna, and behind all that sort of hedging and foliage over there is the biggest landmark in this place. It's a massive timber yard. You'll find it in Claybrooke, Magna. Claybrooke Magna, Claybrooke Large. To finish this run of Harborough parishes this week, we have a set of twins which I'm going to cover on one continuous walk. These are the Claybrooke villages, Claybrooke Magna and Claybrooke Parva. They both sit on the western boundary of Harborough, close to the county border with Warwickshire. As we know from previous experiences with places called Magna and Parva, one means large and the other means small. That's exactly what we find here. Although not groundbreakingly massive, Claybrooke Magna is still the larger of the two villages, and the more northerly too. Once a simple little agricultural village reliant on framework knitting, the surrounding farmland and the watercourse to its east, Claybrooke Magna would become much more of an industrial settlement thanks to its timber yards. Throughout the 20th century, there was an occupational shift from agriculture to timber production, and the face of the village would alter completely. At first, Claybrooke had Coltman Brothers, a timber firm that's still going today, based at the old railway station site in Ashby Magna. The site of their woodyard here has now been built over with housing, but timber is still very much handled in Claybrooke. Whitmore's Timber, founded in Suffolk in the 1890s, relocated to Leicestershire in 1972. Today, it's their yard that dominates the centre of the village on the other side of Main Street from Coltman's original works. Many locals who are still here today worked in these woodyards and enjoyed great times in the Woodcutter pub before it burnt down. Let's check out Claybrooke Magna and see what it's like today. Claybrooke Magna looked like this in 1900. Although not massively dissimilar to the modern village with regards to its layout, it is vastly different when it comes to its contents. Once just a rural farming village with its focus firmly on agriculture and framework knitting, Claybrooke Magna was surrounded by fields, with the nucleus of settlement being just one main road. Whilst that road is still the backbone of the Claybrooke villages, there has been some expansion to both the east and the west. In addition, a huge chunk of the fields to the west have been obliterated by the presence of a massive woodyard. Timber production has been a thing in Claybrooke throughout the 20th century. In addition to the active woodyard, there was once an older woodyard run by Coltmans, but that's now an area of housing called Roman Close. Before we look closer at the village itself, first we have to get there. Coming from Frolesworth, you cross the border here at Claybrooke Magna Mill. If you drive past this today, you'd probably do well to even know there was a mill here. But there is, and it's still harnessing the power of the water it stands on.
Claybrooke Magna Mill is one of 7 Grade 2 listed buildings within the parish. 2 of the other 6 are also within the mill complex. Much like the other mills we've been covering this week, Claybrooke's effort was built in the mid-18th century, 1763 to be precise. It was later extended in 1840. However, milling in Claybrooke has been going on for much longer than the mid-1700s. Ancient records would suggest it's been going on for around 1,000 years. On a site adjacent to the current watermill was an ancient windmill, which was mentioned in the Domesday Book. That, though, has long gone. At Claybrooke Magna Mill, most of the machinery is still intact and the place continues to be in commercial operation. It grinds flour on French burr millstones, which are still driven by water power to this day. There's no electric grinding going on here. If you visit the mill's website, it will tell you that it's situated where the Roman roads of Watling Street and the Fosse Way cross. That's not strictly true, they meet on the other side of the main village. Claybrooke Magna was your typical linear village 125 years ago. It didn't have a lot, but as you can see, it did possess a pub called the Bull's Head, and a chapel too. There used to be 3 pubs here in fact, but only the Bull's Head is shown on this map. The chapel is now gone, and it had a completely different use before it met its demise. Let's get this walk started on a street called Woodcutter Lane. This is a brand new housing estate that was only built within the last 15 years. It's a pretty bog standard one as new builds go. It consists of 2 main roads, Woodcutter Lane and Sawmill Place, and it also has a small play area. The children's playground could claim to be the newest facility in the village. The equipment was totally replaced with brand new items in 2022. New pathways were added at the same time to make the picnic areas easier to access for disabled visitors and those with pushchairs. Now this is all bang averagely modern, but we wouldn't be on this estate if it didn't have some sort of historical interest. The street names are a big giveaway. They are so named because right next door to this estate is Whitmore's Timber, a company that was founded in the 1890s and relocated to Leicestershire from Suffolk in 1972. So let's see the timber yard, and we don't have to go very far. Whitmore's is practically unmissable. Its site is huge, occupying a good chunk of the land to the west of the village cluster. Whitmore's Timber serves many markets nationwide, from construction, joinery and restorative work to furniture production and even boat building. When their original site in Bury St Edmunds was bought by the Ministry of Transport, the company looked to the Midlands to find a new home. They struck lucky with Claybrooke Magna. Being located close to the A5 and the M1 is a massive advantage for these guys because they offer nationwide delivery from this, their new Leicestershire base. Whitmore's Timber is a long-standing importer and distributor of European, American and tropical hardwoods, and they know how to use them. The company was founded by T.G. Whitmore, originally a blacksmith and a wheelwright. It was his son, Austin Whitmore, who started milling homegrown round logs. Before long, those logs were in demand, and by some pretty notable customers. For example, in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, there's a 4-foot-long oak beam supplied by the company. At the Old Bailey in London, the main doors there are also the work of Whitmore's. They were installed in 1958. Also in London, the Globe Theatre contains Whitmore's wood. Where this timber yard now is, there used to be a chapel, but we already know that because we saw it on the map. Until it was demolished in 2010, the chapel, which fell out of use some years before, was used to store some of Whitmore's wood products as well as machinery. Long before Whitmore's came along, Claybrooke was already producing timber. A little further around this route, we'll talk about Coltman Brothers and their involvement with wood here.
Now, my long-time followers know that sometimes I don't film things quite in order, and I've done a really weird thing here, you might think, but it actually makes a bit of sense when you think about it. What we've done is we've gone up to the timber yard, and then I've turned around and come back to this junction here. This is where Bell Street meets the main road that we're walking up. And where you find that junction, you find these houses here. Now, these also had a big connection to the timber yard. Let's discover what that connection was. Opposite the wood yard, you'll see this row of newish houses. I say newish because they've been here for at least 15 years, if not a little longer. They're known as Bellevue Court. They take their name from the Bluebell Inn, a former pub. Rather ironically though, they stand on the site of a different old boozer. This was the location of the Royal Oak, which in its later years became the Woodcutter, taking its name from the timber yards that literally surrounded it. It would likely still be here now if it hadn't have burned down in the middle of the night some years ago. The pub was one of 3 in Claybrooke Magna, only 1 now remains. A bit further up the street we come to the village hall. This is a traditional Victorian building which has been modernised in recent years to offer facilities for social and sporting events. It can accommodate up to 100 people in the main hall, and it also has a smaller meeting room which has space for up to 30 people. This is used on the regular by local groups including Keep Fit classes and yoga, as well as events for the WI, crafters, first responders and coffee mornings too. In the past, it's hosted celebrations for VE Day, the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee, and there was also a celebration to mark the coronation of King Charles III. To the top of the village now, and here we have the former Bull's Head pub. This is the only one of the 3 in Claybrooke that's still going. It was historically owned by Sydney Evershed Limited of Burton-upon-Trent, a brewery which merged with Marston's in 1905 and closed in 1908. The Bull's Head changed its name in 1997. This is now the beautifully named Pig in Muck, and if you walk through the doors of this place, I imagine you will be happy as one. A traditional and friendly village local, the Pig brew their own beer in a small brewery behind the main building. The drinks they produce are known as Pig Pub beers. The brewery has been going since 2013, and the owners even allow the public to see how the beer is brewed. The cask-conditioned beers, which are all served within the pub, can also be found at a sister pub located in Leicester city centre. This one's also locally famous for its food. It's all extremely popular, but especially so is the carvery offered every Sunday and Wednesday. In case you couldn't read that milepost there, the 2 locations on it were Hinckley and Lutterworth. We're 5 miles from one and 6 from the other. Now then, we've got a bit of walking to do around some residential areas next, and this gives me a chance to drop in a little story about a semi-famous man who used to live in this very village. It doesn't have a happy ending though. So now it's time to start making our way back south again, and it's all residential for a bit. As such, here's a mention of Barry Evans, a former resident of the village. He was an actor, known for his appearances in the sitcoms Mind Your Language and Doctor in the House. In 1997, he was found dead at his home in Claybrooke Magna. A youth was charged with attempted murder, but later released, and the coroner issued an open verdict. The exact circumstances surrounding his death remain a mystery to this day. The coroner found a blow to Evans's head and high levels of alcohol in his system. A short will was found on a table next to his body, and a split packet of aspirin tablets was found on the floor. That bore a pre-decimalisation price tag, making it older than 1971 and more than 26 years old. However, the coroner concluded he hadn't taken any. Evans was cremated at Golders Green Crematorium. A blue plaque commemorating Evans can be found at number 8 Buckland Crescent in northwest London, where he once lived.
Next, we go up a cul-de-sac called Roman Close, which is a reference to the crossing point of the Fosse Way and Watling Street, right on the edge of the village. They meet at a hamlet called High Cross, just outside Claybrook Magna. Stick around for tomorrow's episode, because we'll get a look at High Cross on our way out of this area. Roman Close is also historically important to Claybrook Magna for another reason. This street is built on the site of the original woodyard, run by Coltman brothers. Here's a bit about them. Raymond Percy Coltman was born in Ashby Magna in 1883. After attending school there, he left at an early age to work on the Great Central Railway. By 1903, he was renting a small building in Claybrook Magna. After forming a partnership with his brother, William Coltman, they founded the company Coltman Brothers. Coltman Brothers supplied timber for all kinds of purposes. They dealt with pit props, lagging and roofing timber for coal mines, both in the immediate area and also further afield. Coffin boards in oak and elm were sent to Coventry, Leicester, Manchester and Burnley, and trawler fishing bobbins were sent to Grimsby, Hull and Fleetwood. Railway wagon timbers were sent to Rugby, Crewe and Derby via the station at Ulsthorpe. It was a thriving business, one that changed the face of Claybrook completely. Just after World War II had started in the early 1940s, disaster struck. Coltman's mill was burnt down by a fire caused by a spark from a steam engine chimney. This happened on a Friday evening, but by the following Monday morning, the main machines were working again, powered by electricity. The quickness of this transformation from steam to electricity was made possible because at the time they were sending sawn amber to Grimsby for the construction of minesweepers. In the 1950s, Coltmans would construct a new mill on the opposite side of the road in a field at the back of the chapel we mentioned earlier. This would later become the main mill. Both mills continued in production until the early 1970s, at which point the old mill site, now Roman Close, was sold off and turned into housing. The Mallinson Denny group of companies would take over the newer site. Whitmore's Timber had been part of that group since 1958, so now you can see how easy it was for them to move here. Coltman Brothers is still going. They never went out of business. Instead, they just moved. We've seen where they are already this week. They're now at the old station in Ashby Magna. At the end of Roman Close, there's a handy footpath which will bring us out on Bell Street, which takes its name from the third and final pub. On Bell Street today, you'll find a property called the White House. That's this building here. This is, according to what I could find about the Blue Bell, related to the old pub. Exactly how is a little unclear. There were some conflicting ideas in my source material, so there are two possibilities here. One is that the White House was the Blue Bell, and the other is that the pub was close to it and in some way owned by it, and it's now demolished. Whatever the case, the Blue Bell closed in the 1920s and was later used as a bakehouse. Bell Street remains the biggest clue to its once existence. Now we're heading east along Bell Street to find Holly Tree Walk, another dead-end cul-de-sac. It turns into a footpath at its end, and it's that we'll be needing next. Okay, we are on Holly Tree Walk. As you can see, it's not a fully paved road and it turns into a footpath at the end. And what this does is it goes across some fields now and takes us into Claybrook Magna's little brother. So I'll see you on the other side tomorrow. At the end of the street, the footpath starts to cross some fields. If you continue down it, you eventually reach the border between the Claybrook villages. It's still as rural now as this looks here. This part of the village has, for now at least, been untouched by any kind of modern development. And if you come back tomorrow, you can see me complete this walk in the other Claybrooke, the much smaller village of the two. In that episode, we'll be discussing Claybrooke Hall and a church, as well as Alma Park on the A5. See you on the other side of the border in 24 hours. Welcome back to Harborough again, everybody. Now, yesterday I left you on a footpath as I was coming out of Claybrooke Magna. Well, today I'm still on that footpath and we're going to continue the walk through its little brother. If you watched yesterday's episode, you'll know what the name of this place is. If you didn't, welcome to Claybrooke Parva. Claybrooke Parva, Claybrooke small. With one Claybrooke village already behind us, today we're looking at the other one. This is Claybrooke Parva, which was formerly known as Over Claybrooke. By the same token, Claybrooke Magna was sometimes referred to as Great Claybrooke instead. Names change a lot, it seems. The village's name means brook with a clay soil. Both Claybrooke Magna and Claybrooke Parva were listed in the Domesday Book as being within the wapentake of Guthlaxton, which centuries later was referred to as 100. The manor was managed by a local lord named Fulco, who was subordinate to the tenant-in-chief, the powerful Robert de Beaumont, the first Earl of Leicester. So today, this is a small settlement set within some flat agricultural countryside. The form of the village is a large tapering rectangle surrounded by roads and a track with houses on two of the sides. The core is a large square area of open land, unusual in this district. Within it is the church, a large building of red sandstone and granite. Many of the main dwellings here are colour washed and they range in shape and size, giving Claybrooke Parva a bit of a rural character. The standout property here is Claybrooke Hall, once run as a convalescent home attached to Leicester Royal Infirmary. Elsewhere, the village has a school, the only one between either of the two Claybrooke villages. The parish extends out to the west too, taking in part of the A5, the Roman Watling Street. At the end of this episode, we'll get to see where that crosses the Foz Way. It's a hamlet called High Cross on the Warwickshire border. Let's go. Claybrooke Parva has always been the smaller of the two Claybrooke villages, hence the name Parva. Unlike its much larger neighbour, this one hasn't seen anywhere near the same level of development. This is what it looked like in 1900, and to all intents and purposes, it looks virtually the same today, barring a couple of changes, which we'll highlight. Claybrooke Parva can be defined by a small group of dwellings and farm buildings that surround St Peter's Church and the site of Claybrooke Hall. In terms of a village, that's really that. However, the parish extends out to the west, taking in part of the A5, the ancient Roman road, Watling Street. In doing so, it covers Alma House, which you can see on this map. That's now Alma Park. To the north is High Cross, where Watling Street meets the Foz Way. So here we have Claybrooke Parva village, and there's not a lot to it. Essentially, it's formed of three landmarks: Claybrooke Hall, the Church of St Peter, and the primary school. The rest is a clutch of houses, including the vicarage and the impressive Avenue Villas on this corner. You may recall we left off yesterday on a footpath. Let's rejoin the route. The footpath brings you into Claybrooke Parva on its main street, aptly named Main Road. The first property you encounter is the massive 7-bedroomed Claybrooke Hall. Approached via a private gated driveway, this is a magnificent Georgian building which is Grade 2 listed. It's a truly unique historic home. Claybrooke Hall was built in 1718 by Thomas Bird, a local landowner and justice of the peace. In 1765, it was sold to Clure Dicey as a gentleman's house. At the 1841 census, Thomas Edward and Anne Mary Dicey were living here with their 4 sons, including Albert, who was born in this building. Albert was a British jurist and constitutional theorist. He's most widely known as the author of An Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution in 1885. He was a graduate of Balliol College, Oxford, and became a leading constitutional scholar of his day. It was he who popularised the phrase rule of law, although its use does go back to the 17th century. By the 1881 census, Mary Simpson, formerly of Oswaldkirk in Yorkshire, had taken over this hall, living here with her sisters Emma and Louise. Mary had worked with her father, the Reverend Francis Simpson, to improve the lot of the farm lads of Boynton and Carnaby near Bridlington. This work was written about in her book, Ploughing and Sowing, or The Annals of an Evening School in a Yorkshire Village and the Work that Grew Out of It. According to her obituary, her charitable work continued at Claybrooke Hall. This was to become a convalescent home in connection with Leicester Royal Infirmary. Claybrooke Hall was no Downton Abbey, but likely the same things that occurred there did here, just on a smaller scale of that depicted on the TV. It would have been full of young women, all kept busy with household chores. Tradespeople and craftsmen would have used the back door.
Well, for some reason, Claybrooke Parva seems a little bit quieter than Claybrooke Magna. I don't understand why, really, because it's all on the same road. It's weird how it works. Speaking of the road, we need to continue walking on down it. We're at a bend here, where it turns southwards and goes past this gorgeous house, which I'll tell you the name of in a second, heads towards Avenue Villas, and then it turns again to the left. But we're not going all the way down there. Instead, we're going to be heading towards the church, which is in this parcel of land just here. Now, of course, Claybrooke Hall is a fabulous building, but there are many more in this village. Just by taking a walk along Main Road, you're treated to some awesome ones. Take the homestead, for example, on the bend as the road makes its way south towards Avenue Villas. Currently, this is ranked as the highest value property in either of the Claybrooke villages. It's worth, at present, a whopping £1.18 million, more than Claybrooke Hall, amazingly. Let's skip past this lovely building to Avenue Villas themselves. Avenue Villas are 2 pairs of late 19th century dwellings, and it might just be my opinion, but I think these are the most charming houses in the whole village. Who needs Claybrooke Hall? So, as you'll have gathered so far, Claybrooke Parva was and still remains a very rural village. It's nothing like Claybrooke Magna, which was way more industrious. As we know, framework knitting took place in Claybrooke Magna, but little or none occurred here in Claybrooke Parva. The coach road from London to Chester passed through the village at one time, but it was Ulsthorpe and Claybrooke Magna which developed its many inns. The role of Claybrooke Parva, then, was historically a religious one, and that brings us to the church, located right in the middle of the village. Right, we've made it to the church then. Let's see if this is open. I would very much like to get inside the church today because I haven't managed to yet. Let's see. No, it's not. Never mind. That means we're just going to have to do everything from the outside.
St Peter's Church dominates the village and is, to quote Simon Jenkins in his England's 1,000 Best Churches, a jewel. The oldest parts of this date back to 1100. It's generally agreed that the section in question is the base of the tower. The rest of it is 17th century. Claybrooke's church is justifiably famed for its fine chancel, which somehow seems at odds with the rest of the church. That part of the building is far grander than the rest, with its 3 large light windows with flowing tracery. There are remains of medieval glass in the windows. Only one window, though, is of stained glass, dating from an 1878 restoration by Street. The nave is interesting too, by the way. It has some 15th century wood carvings of animals and monsters. The nave is perpendicular, and there's some 18th century graffiti carvings on the exterior walls of the chancel. Also outside, there's a medieval mast dial and deep grooves in one of the windows, thought to be caused by centuries of locals sharpening arrows. This church looks after not just the parishioners of Claybrooke Magna and Claybrooke Parva, but also those of Ulsthorpe and Wibtoft. Although Wibtoft has a small chapel, Ulsthorpe has none, although in medieval times there may also have been a chapel there, as we'll discover. Incidentally, when the Romans vacated this area, the Saxons settled in Claybrooke Parva. There was an Anglo-Saxon manor here and a manor house to go with it. The moat that was once associated with that building still exists by the burial ground, and it's believed the foundations of St Peter's, not visible to us, are also Saxon.
It's a big old cemetery we're passing here, people, on this path. So if you walk literally past the church, the road ends and it turns into the path you've just seen, and then you have this cemetery on the left hand side. It's massive. It's absolutely huge. I can't even see the back of it, and I reckon there's still some space in here. So yeah, this is probably still very much used, I would say. Anyway, once you get to the cemetery here, the path carries on and runs back into another road. We have just one landmark left to see on the main walk, and that would be Claybrooke's School, which serves not just Claybrooke Parva, but also Claybrooke Magna and a few other places too. Our last job, before we start to make our way back towards Claybrooke Magna, is to see the primary school, the only one that the Claybrooke villages have. At the start of the 19th century, there were 2 charity schools for boys which served the villages. One was Mark Smith's charity school, dating from the 1660s. The other school was supported by an annual payment from the Corporation of Leicester via Alderman Newton's charity, which supported 25 boys. The payment was conditional upon Claybrooke Parish contributing something towards maintenance. This was achieved by combining the 2 schools. Now, the date of the merger is not entirely clear, but it may have been in 1813 or 14, because that's when the diocese provided the land for a brand new national school. By 1833, the new school was supported by the 2 endowments, and it contained 88 boys. The master's salary was augmented by a payment from the diocese of Claybrooke Hall. There was also another school for girls, which met in a schoolhouse provided by the diocese, who also supported that school's ongoing costs. There was also a Sunday school at Claybrooke Parva in 1818, attended by 120 children from across the parish. By 1873, the national school had been enlarged and it became a mixed affair with separate rooms for boys, girls and infants. It has stood the test of time ever since, still serving the villages in the same way as it did in 1873. All that's changed really is the name. Today, it's simply known as Claybrooke Primary School. Well, I'll tell you what, people, I'm kind of glad that Claybrooke Magna and Claybrooke Parva are 2 separate parishes, because if this was all one, just called Claybrooke, this would be a fairly lengthy episode, wouldn't it? As it is, it's 2 separate ones, and we're almost at the end. Now, I've got one more job left to do on foot here, and that is to leave one of my cards on the parish notice board, which you can find close to the school. So let's do that now. Okay, job done. Now I'm going to make my way back to the car, and to finish this episode off, we're heading to the Roman centre of Britain.
Claybrooke Parva's boundaries cover this area to the west, bordering onto the Rugby district of Warwickshire. It takes in part of the A5, the Roman Watling Street. On this map you can see a property on the Leicestershire side called Alma House. Let's see what's become of that today, and then we'll go further up the A5 to a hamlet called High Cross. Alma Park is a business park and conference centre which occupies the site and grounds of another historic dwelling called Alma House, right next to the A5. Alma Park describes itself as being at the heart of the Midlands Motorway Golden Triangle, formed by the M1, the M6 and the M69. It has 20,000 square feet of unique office space split into many units containing a number of businesses. Being so close to a Roman road makes this place unusual. The fields surrounding Alma House frequently turn up ancient pottery, a collection of which is available for viewing on site. So you can perhaps think of this as a mini museum too. Now, just up the A5 from Alma Park is the hamlet of High Cross. It partially sits within Claybrooke Parva's boundaries, but bits of it spill over the border. Some of it lies in Warwickshire, whilst the rest is actually in Sharnford, a Blaby district parish we've yet to cover. While we're on the A5, it just makes sense to go and cover this in one go, right here. High Cross is the name given to the crossroads where Watling Street and the Fosway, two major Roman roads, meet each other. A naturally strategic high point, High Cross was the central crossroads of both Anglo-Saxon and Roman Britain. It was a hugely important location for both of them. High Cross has marked several other frontiers throughout history. In the Iron Age, for example, the area is believed to have been the frontier between the Coriol-Torvi and Dobunni tribes. It was also the border between the Danelaw, controlled by the Vikings, and Saxon territory. This is why High Cross, still to this day, sits on a border, because it reflects the Danelaw boundary. In Roman times, the hamlet was the site of a Romano-British settlement known as Venae or Venanis, and that had an accompanying fort. Venae may have been the meeting point for Roman regiments in their final battle against Boudicca, sometimes called the Battle of Watling Street, which would have been fought nearby. Historians of the 17th and 18th centuries reported very extensive visible Roman ruins around High Cross, leading to a belief that Venae was a major Roman settlement. However, 20th century findings disagree, and today historians usually describe Venae as a small town instead. As denoted by its name, High Cross is at the top of a hill. In fact, it's so high up here that you could at one time see some 57 churches in the surrounding countryside with the aid of a telescope. The extensive area of relatively flat land on the Warwickshire side is often referred to by geographers as the High Cross Plateau.
Okay, here we are then at High Cross, and you can see behind me we have a monument. Let's talk about this to finish.
So to mark the crossing point, there was a monument. It was built in 1712 and funded by the local landowner of the time, the Earl of Denbigh. It was placed to celebrate victories against France by the Duke of Marlborough, as well as marking the centre of Roman Britain. It consisted of 4 Doric columns with an orb and a cross above them. However, it was struck by lightning in 1791, and only the plinth remains today. The Doric columns would have featured various coats of arms, including those of the Lords of Warwickshire and Leicestershire and the Earl of Coventry, Lord Compton. The plinth remains Grade 2 listed, and you can still see the Latin inscriptions on its sides, the stone Tuscan pillars on its corners, and a large stone and brick platform on the top. One inscription on the monument reads, "If, traveller, you search for the footsteps of the ancient Romans, here you may behold them." And that's it, folks. Another Harborough run comes to its conclusion, but I won't be away for long. You see, I made it my mission at the start of this year to concentrate heavily on Leicestershire. That means I'll be back here within literally a couple of weeks. We'll be taking on another Harborough run, this time to the east, close to the Rutland border. See you there soon. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.